Hello and welcome to Uncommon Ground. I'm Talal Yassin. My guest today is Lucy Turnbull, a fearless business leader and former Lord Mayor of Sydney. She's someone who has spent her life shaping cities, policy and institutions while navigating the unique challenges of being married to a Prime Minister. Lucy was the first woman to serve as Lord Mayor of Sydney and has held key roles driving innovation and city building across the country. But beyond the titles, what stands out is her clarity of vision and her ability to think big while staying grounded in community. In this episode, we talk about how she's forged her voice in the public eye and what she's learned from a life of leadership. Let's get into it. Thank you for joining me on Uncommon Ground, Lucy.
Thank you, Talal, for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. I want to talk to you about a lot of things, and I was trying to sort of work out Lucy Turnbull. There's so much history there. Apart from our relationship that I've known you for at least a couple of decades, and we'll talk a bit about that in a moment, you've achieved so much over such a long period of time. So I'm going to try and compact them a bit. But I want to start at the very start. What is the earliest memory of Lucy Turnbull when she came to the world? You know, in 7, 8, 9.
Yeah.
What's the first memories you have?
Okay, well, when I was a very little kid, actually, it would have been when I was about 4 or 5 or 6. I remember because my parents lived obviously with me in an apartment in Macleay Street in Potts Point, and I remember walking around that part of Sydney and visiting Elizabeth Bay Park, and I dimly remember the sensation. I ran off away from my mother one day and plonked myself into the pond in Elizabeth Bay Park, and I remember getting really wet. I think I was about 3 or 4. But I remember the light, and I remember the way the interplay with the trees and the buildings and the sunlight and all that sort of stuff. So I was very conscious of my physical environment. And my dad was a barrister. He was a barrister for 62 years, but he was a much younger barrister then. And I remember I used to go to visit his chambers and my godfather's chambers. They both worked in this beautiful old Victorian building where the court building is now in Macquarie Street and Queen Square. And I remember the height of the ceilings and again the sunlight and the feeling and the I guess the architectural details and just the whole physical ambience and how fabulous it was and how much I loved it. So a few years later, I was really devastated when all those beautiful old buildings in Phillip Street came down because I could remember how beautiful they were. And what went up in its place was certainly the barristers' chambers in Selborne Street were a pretty bad example of cheap, stripped down 1960s architectural modernism. So I got the sense for that what was being put back wasn't nearly as good as what was there before. Like we were losing a lot of quality, a lot of sunlight, a lot of ambience. So I thought to myself that actually you need to rebuild cities, but you've got to do it well. That sort of filtered through to me much later in life. The other things that happened to me much later in life when I was actually a sort of seminal experience for me when I was almost 13 was I went with my mum and dad on an official tour because my dad was the Commonwealth Attorney General, and he was going to a meeting of Attorneys General, Commonwealth members of the Commonwealth Attorneys General in Delhi, and I trailed along with them. And I obviously didn't go up to all the grown-up events, but we did go on tours, and especially touring through Old Delhi on foot was absolutely fascinating. It was beautiful. It was full of people, but I could see people doing things like, particularly women who I thought were really old. They were probably in their mid-20s because I was nearly 13, doing fine needlework on sewing machines in really bad lighting. And my dad had always drummed into me, turn on the reading light when you read a book, because I was a bit of a bookworm. And I could see these women working really hard, doing exquisitely fine stuff on machines, and I was always shocking with a sewing machine. So I was very much in awe of what they were doing. And I thought to myself, by the time those women are maybe in their mid-40s, which I thought was older than God, they probably won't be able to do that work because the lighting has been no good and they might not get the eye care they need. So I was very acutely aware that there was a huge difference in the way their lives were compared to my life. And obviously, there were lots of kids who were beggars, obviously, really, 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 you know, not economically advantaged, probably not educationally advantaged. So I was woken up very powerfully and strongly to the idea there is a world out there that is so different to my own world. And it fascinated and intrigued me, but it made me very aware of how lucky and how privileged I was, and how what an important part of being a human is actually stepping into the shoes and having empathy and concern about people that are living completely different lives in completely different worlds, and not to just think the only important thing is your own life, and the way, the way that the ups and downs of any teenage life. It taught me very powerfully never to feel sorry for myself, and always to try to have empathy for other people and respect for other people.
Wow. And give me the thumbnail chronology of Lucy Turnbull. So uh, we got when 3 and 13.
Yep.
Which school did you go to?
I went to a Catholic girls' school called King Koppel Rose Bay.
Kincoppel. Very
Yep.
good school.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
very
Yeah.
well known. And
It was
you
actually
won.
established. The land was granted by one of my ancestors. Like I think I can't remember, it's my great grandfather or my great great grandfather, but they gave the land for King Koppel in Elizabeth Bay, and also helped buy the land at Rose Bay Convent.
Right. And which high school did you go to? You went to that high school?
I
Primary and
went
high?
to a girls' boarding school for 4 years called Frensham in the countryside in the Southern Highlands.
Is
It
that
was
in
much more
Goulburn?
no, near Mittagong
Mittagong?
in
Yeah.
Mittagong. Yep.
Mhm.
And then the final 2 years was educated in Sydney Girls High. Yeah.
Sydney Girls. Great. And you're one of two, one of one.
I've got two younger brothers.
The young and how much how
Well, they're not that young. One's about to hit his 60s and the other one's in his 60s. So,
right.
no, actually, I think they're both in their 60s now.
Right. And they went public life like yourself. They
Yeah, well, they've my middle brother Tom, who's the elder of the two brothers, he went to the bar, but he's actually had a very different career to my dad, who was very commercial, sort of like constitutional law. My brother Tom has been a barrister for a very long time, but he's actually mostly practiced criminal law.
right.
So he sort of he's getting to be a bit to me like Rumpole of the Bailey, which I used to watch the television show. He reminds me in certain respects only of him.
Right. And
Yeah.
the law travels quite widely in your family, I
Yes.
guess.
Yes.
And I would tend to describe the Hughes family as establishment in the best possible way. The establishment of Australia, the great hearts, the giving nature. You're certainly that one I've ever met with over the last 2 decades. Inquisitive, intelligent, present, and empathetic. And that kind of seems to describe the family history.
Thank you. I guess it is. My mum was also a very empathetic person. She was never in the limelight, but she was very empathetic, very good connector with people, and so she's a big part of what's inspired me too. She did, on the plus side, really, I think, encourage a sense of empathy and social connection. Not in a sort of like a social celebrity kind of being social, sort of socialite, but just human connection. And I think, but on the other hand, she grew up at a time when women were not expected to have careers when they were married, and I think it's a great misfortune that she didn't actually keep working, because she was one of the smartest people I've ever met, and I think that she would have been much more fulfilled if she'd grown up at my age, which wouldn't have been possible because she couldn't have been my mother, because she could have pursued a career. She was so talented and so bright.
And tell me a bit more about your childhood generally. So you got 13, you finished school.
Yeah.
What were your dreams and ambitions then? What was
Well,
the plan?
I think, see, this is the thing. I never had a very clear plan. I've sort of like, I've taken opportunities as they've arisen. So I didn't, lie in bed thinking, what's it going to be like when I have a law degree? Because to be honest with you, I had a very open mind about what I'd do when I finished school. My dad really wanted me to go into this is in early high school years. He thought it would be great if I went into the foreign affairs, as it then was called, and became a diplomat. and I didn't really know what was entailed in that. I met a few diplomats when I travelled around, and I thought, "Oh, that's kind of interesting," but you're changing location a lot, and it's sort of like it evolved. And so I actually had a gap year after finishing high school, and I started a course which I did not like. And Dad said,
Which one was that?
it was a communications course at UTS. It wasn't UTS, it was a New South Wales Institute of Technology, and that was a very political time when it was very political on campus, and feminism was totally like bigger than Ben-Hur. And it was kind of, I found it, to be honest with you, I was always a feminist, but a quiet feminist. So I found that really heavy political lens a bit hard, but it wasn't my speed at all. Um, so I, so I did it. My dad put a very good deal to me, which he said, you can go off and have, the next 6 or 8 months off, whatever it was, if you come back and study law. And so I said, okay, deal. So I went and lived in Italy and France for 6 and 8 months, 2 8 months. I was basically 6 months there. Then I met up with my dad in London when he was doing a case in the Privy Council, which was a fascinating time to be there in 1976. And in Italy, there was so much social and cultural change that women were, marching in the streets. That I don't think divorce was legal yet then. It was about to become legal, but certainly abortion was a big issue, and feminism was a big issue, and there was literally a lot of fighting on the streets there. And I could understand it in the context of the Italy of those days more than I could of the Sydney of when I was at uni, because to me, we weren't facing the same kind of societal challenges, or I didn't think so anyway.
And you came back then and did law at UTS?
No, at Sydney, yeah.
At Sydney University, my old alma mater.
Yeah.
All right. And how'd you find that? What was that experience like for you?
Well, again, the experience of studying law, I didn't love. And one of the reasons I didn't love it was that it was in the old law school building on the corner of Phillip and Elizabeth Street and King Street. It was the most desperate building to learn anything. I do have a predisposition to feeling very constrained in dark spaces without windows. So I'm really glad I'm not going to be here all day, because I would get a bit edgy after a while. I love a window. I love daylight. And the law school lecture theatres had none of the above. And there were no really great spaces inside the building. And to me, it was like a terrible place for learning. It just didn't work as a learning place. It was so um, utilitarian and actually non-functional, and I really didn't enjoy it at all. So I was really glad, and in fact, many years later, Malcolm and I, through the Turnbull Foundation, supported the capital funding of relocating the law school back to the University of
That's how
Sydney
bad it
campus.
was. You
That's
remember?
how bad it was. And I thought, oh my goodness, they're finally getting there. That's a great idea. We'll help. Well, I was on the fundraising committee with lots of other people, and I thought, what a great idea. And I hear that it's working.
It is. I've been there. I've been speaking to the chancellor and vice chancellor and the
Yeah,
head of the law school. It is a very different experience.
very different. Yeah,
Very.
because it was pretty grim in Phillip Street.
It was
Yeah,
brutalist.
it was horrible. It was
Yeah.
brutalist, dark, depressing. Like there was nothing there that encouraged you
Yeah.
to love learning there.
Yeah, indeed. And so, did you ever practice as a lawyer?
Yeah, I did. I was actually a law clerk and a paralegal at a large law firm at Allen's for a couple of years, but I actually got married very young. I got married when I was, 21. So I never really had time to practice law much, because I lived in Oxford with Malcolm when he was finishing university for a year, and sort of dived into teaching myself how to cook. It was too hard to do my final year, so I came back and did my final year when I came back to Australia. So I finished my exams in 1981, my actual, and graduated in 82, by which stage I was pregnant with Alex, because he was born in August 82.
And then you, for the next little while, had a family, basically.
Well, yeah, but I decided to do an MBA, because I thought studying for an MBA, and I went to the art gallery. The art gallery. I didn't go to the art gallery. I went to the Australian Graduate School of Management at University of UNSW, which I loved, because that was a building that had daylight. It was a bit of a drag driving to it, but it had daylight and a really fantastic learning culture and open-minded culture, and you could ask anything, you could do anything. The lecturers were just amazing. So it was a qualitatively quite different experience.
You've just kicked off a debate which rages through our family: Sydney University or University of New South Wales. Which one do you pick? You clearly pick one.
Well, I just love I love I love my time at the AGSM, and I love what the University of New South Wales does in several respects. I'm an adjunct professor at the Faculty of the Built Environment, and so I'm sort of involved in that respect. I've had more contact with the University of New South Wales for various reasons, and they gave me an on doc, so I thought that was very kind of them.
And it is good on them. They made a good choice. And so, just one more sort of question about the thumbnail or the chronology of life, because people, hear a lot about you, but they just don't have that thread
Yeah.
of. And so you had your family. You had the Alex.
So I did my MBA in between child number 1 and child number 2.
Wow.
So by the time I had child number 2, I'd finished my MBA, and then basically took 1985 off because with 2 small kids, and then in 1986 went back to work, but on a part-time basis for a couple of years,
Yeah. And so what did you
and
do?
did the College of Law and all that sort
Oh
of
yeah, and then you
exciting
finished
stuff.
all that off. And so what do you do after that by way of career? Where
Well, I
did you
worked.
go in
I
there?
worked with Malcolm when it was a law firm, and then it morphed into an investment bank, and I worked part time there, with very small kids more sporadically, and then came back, more intensively to work with Malcolm in probably about 1990, 91 for a couple of years.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay, and so let's talk about Malcolm.
yeah.
And that's Malcolm Turnbull, former Prime Minister of Australia, 2015 to 2018.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know you got met really early. I've known you for a long time. I
Yeah.
didn't realize you got married. You were 21. He was like
He was 24.
he was
No,
24.
he was 24. No, he wasn't quite 25. Yeah, he was really young too. But I think he had a sort of like his family split when his parents split when he was very little, and his mum actually lived overseas, and he was very much brought up with his dad. And I think, like a lot of kids from split families, he was very keen to kind of recreate his own family. So that's why he was very keen on getting married quite young. And I was, of course, keen. I was madly in love with him.
Yes.
But I think it was none of my friends were getting married at 21.
Yeah. So you
It was quite. They thought it was quite
leaders
unusual.
go first. You were a leader.
Yeah. He said he kept on saying, "Oh, can we get married? Can we get married?" I said, "Yeah, that'd be a great idea, but I think we need to grow up first."
So you end up growing up together.
He's very persuasive.
Right. Indeed. And so one of the things I'd mention is that you and Malcolm, my observation is, have a true partnership,
Oh,
a
thank you.
true relationship.
I think so.
And that's unusual. And I say that in the best possible way, because you've traipsed through family life, university life, investment banking, law,
Yeah.
politics,
Mm.
and
now business.
now business.
We
And
did
so
this together.
describe to me how that feels like, because I mean that is very unusual.
Yeah,
In very few people have that luxury.
that's right. Well, I'm blessed to have Malcolm in my life, and it's been. But you're right. It has been a true journey of partnership, or in all respects, and it still is, and that's quite unusual. I mean, the cadence of our working together has varied. Obviously, when you're in politics, or when he moved to a large investment bank, a Wall Street investment bank, the cadence of working together kind of changes, and it's sort of it's varied through time, but it's definitely always been there.
Yeah.
So when he went to work for the large investment bank not in Wall Street, but that's where it's headquartered, that's when I took the opportunity of finishing writing a book about the history of Sydney, and also sort of like thought about other opportunities. And that's when I was writing a book about the history of Sydney, that's when I met the then Lord Mayor, Frank Sartor, who'd been the mayor for quite a while by then, like since 1991, because I wanted to ask him about what he was doing in the city of Sydney, because I thought it was really exciting stuff. And then we had a good, we were in good contact and communication. He said, "Oh, do you want to be one of my people standing on my ticket in 1999?" I said, "Yeah, that sounds interesting." So that's what took me to local government.
So like, cool. One more question about, or one more observation. So we had dinner recently,
Yeah.
and talking about the true relationship, and its uniqueness is Malcolm arrived early, as he always does.
Yeah.
I arrived slightly later, and you arrived slightly after that. And And for me, the delightfulness of the light of his eyes when you showed up,
Oh, there.
it was amazing to see. He went from pontificating, well, we were both pontificating about AUKUS,
Yeah.
and and then when it was just an amazing experience. And I want to note that for the record, because I think it's quite unique and lovely and beautiful.
Well, thank you.
And from my perspective, that's something, you got married at 21.
Yeah.
You're slightly older than 21 at the moment.
I am. We've been married for 45 years.
45 years. That is amazing, and something, that people want to know about, because it's the method for success. A lot of people that are married, it's not the same, and I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah. No, it is unusual. It is unusual. Yeah.
And wonderful. But leaving that aside, because it's about you, not Malcolm, but I wanted to point out the relationship, is you clearly have a passion and a purpose for urban living and cities, and you just mentioned how you met Frank Sauer while
Yeah.
writing your book. But something must have driven that, because even right now when we've been speaking, it's all centered around light, the building,
Yeah.
even your studies, whether you liked it or not.
Yeah.
So what triggered that passion?
I don't know. I think it was just, what I was talking about earlier, how when the city changed and this beautiful old building on Queen Square was pulled down for the Supreme Court and the barristers' chambers, I just thought, well, that wasn't a great outcome. I mean, you needed a bigger court building. There's no doubt about that. But, I don't think there was enough respect for streetscapes and how they were changing. I think it's really changed a lot now. But in the 60s and the early 70s, the average quality of new buildings was pretty bad. And I guess living in Sydney and watching that really woke me up to how, in some respects, modernism and modernity was not working. I mean, there was some beautiful modernist architecture. Like, I love the work that Harry Seidler's done in the city. Like, I used to work in the MLC building when I was a baby paralegal sort of law clerk, and in the Grosvenor I call it Grosvenor Square, but the Grosvenor building, in George Street, and I love working in those buildings. But there was a lot of very FAQ or below buildings going up, and I just thought that was a very sad loss. And so that's what made me interested in the way the city was changing, and that's actually what drove me to writing the book about history, because I could sense at the age by my late 30s, I could sense the great change that Sydney had gone through, and I was very, not only in terms of the built form, but in terms of the demography, the population, just the whole way it worked. And I was really fascinated by that, because cities have always been interesting to me, not just how tall the buildings are and whether there's sunlight in the streets, but who the people are and what places they use. What places do people come to gather in? How do they use parks and public spaces, and how lively and animated this is the city? And I guess one of the things that I took away from living in Italy and Florence and visiting a lot of European cities is how lively cities can be if they're medium density or above. And New York's another good example of that. That density can actually really promote, when it's done well, can really promote a sense of energy and connectedness and, just being a fun place to be.
And so, and we'll get back to that, because I have some views about that.
Yeah.
As you know, so picking up where you became a councillor, City Council, Frank Sauer, who then went on to be
He went to state
government
Yep.
minister. Is Minister for Planning, if I recall correctly,
And medical research.
and medical research.
Mhm.
And so you joined the council, and as one of his councillors, what was his ticket called? His
Living City.
Living City.
Yes.
Did he live up to that?
I think he did. I think he did. So what he did was he embedded higher density controls. This is getting a bit technical, but higher density controls for residential buildings in the city. And then a few years in, he introduced design quality and design competitions, which made design contestable. And competition is good for design and architectural quality, I think. So I kind of helped him embed that, and at the sort of like the development control, which is when it gets a bit technical. So I think he achieved a lot. He spent a lot of money. He turned around the finances, and he built a lot of community facilities like the King George Rec facility in the Rocks, and lots of other ones, lots of swimming pools, the one out near the cathedral, Ultimo, he did a lot of CapEx works, which really, I think, improved the city. And I think the whole idea of promoting the city, he did a huge amount of, spent a huge amount on public realm upgrades to get Sydney ready for the Olympics. And he really, think, thought deeply and passionately about how to make the city better and more livable and living, because it was pretty dead. It was like pretty dead after 5 o'clock at night or 6 o'clock, and actually bring life back into the city. And I think that was a terrific thing to do. And it's always a work in progress. It's been through its ups and downs. I have a view that now, 24 years after Frank left, or 25 years, and similar, less than me by a year or so, um, 1 year less than for me, the city has actually gone through lots of ups and downs. But I actually think now, and I know this is, it's probably a weird thing to say, but I actually think the liveliness in Parramatta is like off the scale compared to the Sydney CBD. Like it's got good bits, but it doesn't project nearly the same energy and liveliness and, just sheer, I don't know, like activity that Parramatta, has with Parramatta Square and all the improvements to the public realm there and the light rail. It's just like a really fabulous place now. And whereas I think it was very strange. Millions of years ago, I helped as a law clerk do a document discovery in Rydalmere. So I got to know Parramatta quite well because we used to get the taxi to Parramatta Macca's. And that was a long time ago. Like that, we're talking about 1978 or thereabouts. Parramatta is a completely different place now. And the transformation of Parramatta is really something to behold. And I think all sort of city centres need to keep evolving and being aware that they need to keep kicking along. They can't just sit on their laurels and take anything for granted.
I absolutely agree about Sydney versus Parramatta. Parramatta's lively. I'd also argue for those interested, go to Burwood on a weeknight
Oh, I love
or
Burwood.
Lidcombe.
Yeah,
They are amazing.
yeah. I'm less familiar with Lidcombe, but Burwood and actually Granville's great too. I don't do Granville during the day. I know Burwood during the day. I know they're both really fabulous places to hang out.
Done a tour of Western Sydney. A culinary one nonetheless. So going back to, so if Frank Sartor left, did you become mayor after?
Yes, yes. I was the mayor for about a year until the election, and this had all been sort of, is foreshadowed and was going to happen. But during my term as Lord Mayor, the area of the city of Sydney really expanded to include. It used to be just really the CBD and Pyrmont and Ultimo, and expanded to include Glebe, Potts Point, Kings Cross, Woolloomooloo, Elizabeth Bay. It really up to Rushcutters Bay Park and Darlinghurst. It really kind of expanded hugely. So we had I think, a really exciting period of upgrading service delivery, like removing rubbish and graffiti and improving services for those new areas, which was great. And I think it was really well handled. And it was really due to the incredible hard work of the management team and the CEO of the council. But I think, the stewardship of Frank and then me actually really helped with that project of not making people scared that they were part of the city of Sydney, but actually thinking, oh, this is great. Of course, not everyone's happy. Like the local South Sydney councillors weren't always terribly happy with the outcome, and that was great. But then the state government decided to take another step, which was to completely merge South Sydney, not just part of it, with the city of Sydney, which they did in February 2004. And that really changed the landscape politically, and it made it very untenable for me to actually keep going. And one of the things I would actually say that, you know, just make an observation, is that the reason it was presented to me, that part of the reason by people in the Labor Party that this was being done, was because my husband was going into Liberal Party politics. At that point, he was the federal treasurer of the Liberal Party, and he was sort of heading in the direction of standing for pre-selection. And I'd like to think that wouldn't happen to anyone today, because when I was in the town hall, I was an independent member of the Living City team. I was not, pushing any political barrow. I had a very productive working relationship with the Carr government, but the powers that be just thought it was not practicable or a good idea for me to continue, because I had this political contagion from my husband, and I'd really like to think that that doesn't happen to any woman anymore.
I agree. And it's fascinating. I had Bob Carr, this chair,
Mm,
and he was boasting to me that he had Malcolm Turnbull present his local Labor Party branch,
exactly.
how things have changed.
Yes, yes, yeah. Oh no, they're still good friends. They've
Oh,
always
yeah, of
been good
course, of
friends.
course.
And like one of our first dates was going on a date with Bob and Helena, and so they've known me for a long time. Anyway, it is what it is. Politics is what it is, and it can have its ups and downs.
So, but it was the Carr government that actually put that in.
I think it was that. Well, I think yeah. I don't think it was. I don't think it was. I think it was the organisation as well as the government. I think the Sussex Street operation wasn't comfortable with it.
Right. It says something fascinating. You and Bob Carr and Helena and Malcolm went on one of the first dates together.
Mm.
Tell me about that.
Well, we went out to a Chinese restaurant, but I remember going to their house in Maroubra and Helena cooked this yummy curry, and I remember meeting her dad, who was quite old, and I don't think he lived a lot longer, but yeah, we used to do things together quite regularly. Yeah.
Wow, what a circle. Labor Foreign Minister of Australia, Liberal Prime Minister of Australia, we're in a double dating in the early days.
Yeah, like long before anyone went into politics.
Indeed,
Yes.
indeed.
Yeah.
So talking about politics, last question about council. How'd you cope with the politics? You sort of touched on it then.
Mm.
Was it a different world for you? Because it could be, I mean, especially Sydney City Council, I tend to call it, democratic dictatorship.
Mm.
So when Frank was in. He was like in for a long, he controlled the council
Yeah.
for good or for bad.
Yep.
And now we have Clover Moore still.
20 years.
20 years.
Yeah.
So that's democratic dictatorship.
Coming up for 25.
Yeah, indeed. So how would you...
I don't think it doesn't have to be democratic dictatorship, but I think I think that Frank was very clear. So he didn't have a majority until 1999. So that's why the Deputy Lord Mayor was always Henry Sang, or might have, I don't know who was the Deputy Mayor before Henry, because the Labor councillor was kind of like would get the numbers over the line so that Frank could I guess have a reliable control of council meetings, which is really important, just like Parliament. And then in 1999, his vote increased, so we got a majority of councillors. So that's when I became the deputy mayor, because we didn't have to rely on the Labor Party for a majority vote.
Yeah. And did you enjoy council?
I did.
And the politics of council?
I love. Yeah, listen, I love doing really crazy things. Like I know it's really weird, but I chaired the traffic committee, which was like, it was very micro, in the sense that, like if somebody wanted to change a parking sign or, approve a street parade and the traffic arrangements for that, we would have to talk about that. And it's very micro, but it was actually really great because you had members of the police, like not the police commissioner, sort of, but really great people from the police and the roads authority and people, at lower levels from all across the government agencies and systems that made the city work. And I got a very live experience, a very real experience of how cities only work when you have a multiplicity of all the people who need to make decisions in the room making decisions. And you can't just have one person doing, or one government authority saying, bang, we're going to do this, to actually make it work. So I got a sense of the importance and significance of collaboration and coordination. So that sort of guided a lot of what I did later. Not just the traffic committee, but other committees too, like the Central Sydney Planning Committee. So that's a combo between state and local government. So, like the city council is a very important thing, but its administrative reach is quite limited because you've got government agencies really doing a lot of stuff too, like what used to be the Foreshore Authority and, all the land the state government owns and responsible for, the trains, the buses, the roads, everything, all the box and dice. So it's a complicated sort of network of things that have to link together and work functionally, not dysfunctionally.
All politics is personal.
Yeah.
And the most personal politics is where you live.
Yeah.
And your environment. And I think if I've got this right, they used to say, council's about road, rubbish and rates. Was that the right? Is that the right? I think I've got. Well,
that's
wrong.
A really big rates, whatever we don't go with those three. Yeah, that's to an extent that's true, but I think that local government has the capacity, and also, if it has free cash flow, which, Frank got it to a position where it did have free cash flow to do capex investment in making the place work better for the different communities. So that's another big role too. But roads, rates, and rubbish, that's important, and you should never underestimate the rubbish or the roads. But of course, in the city, there's a lot of main roads which are a state government responsibility. So it's true, but local roads, rates, and rubbish, but the rubbish is really important.
So as you talk, this is 20 something years ago. Again, you talk with great purpose about cities, urban, and the fact that you're fascinated by the traffic committee. And I know most
I
councillors,
know it's really weird.
most councillors, this is who they are, because I've seen them say, "Oh, I've got to go to traffic committee." It's like,
Yeah.
and they describe the police, but that's amazing, purpose driven. So the reason is that the reason you enjoyed it, because it was all around that purpose, the way
Yeah.
people live in urban landscapes.
Yeah, because it's a combination of the way the systems work and the way the place works, and the place will only work if the systems like the parking and the traffic and all that stuff work. So it's a multi-layered thing.
Right. So after council, you did many things, and I'm not going to list them here. But one of them is being chief commissioner for the Greater Sydney Commission.
Yeah,
Can you
can I just just
please?
interrupting you there for a sec? One of the things that was actually, I think, one of the most moving things I did when I was in the town hall. Frank's partner had just passed away, so he was having a few weeks, traveling and I guess recovery time. So I was sort of holding the reins when 9/11 happened in 2001, and it was when you have that role of being acting Lord Mayor, you think, goodness, you hold kind of civic responsibility for the city. And I thought, well, you know, what can we do? How can the city express its grief and its, you know, the great tragedy that had just occurred in the States? And I actually had this idea. I had a very good friend. She's still a very good friend who used to be the head of protocol. And I said, what can we do? I said, what about a condolence book? Like, just to put it in the entry vestibule of the town hall, just because I just feel very strongly that people, it's like we've had with bushfires and everything, but people need a way to express their condolence and their sympathy for what's happened. And I thought, oh, I'll probably get about 50 people turn up, after they've done Thursday night shopping. There was a huge take up of that. It really worked, but because it worked not only as a gesture to the people of New York and in the US where this event had happened, but it also, I think it gave members of the Sydney community a way of expressing their grief, which I think's just as important as showing, I guess, empathy and sympathy with the people who have been affected by that terrible event. So I think mayors, or acting mayors in my case, actually can, um, I guess, allow pathways for people to express grief and empathy and sympathy at the appropriate time.
And that was I remember the reading about the condolence book. How many people signed it?
I don't remember, but I think it was several thousand.
Yeah.
So it was really
I
popular.
thought
Like, there were
it was at
cute
least
lines.
8,000 or something.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot.
I may be misremembering.
Yeah, no, it was a lot, and there were a lot of people who wanted to line up to do it. And I think, it was a great thing to be able to present to the people of to the US, to the Consul General, but also it was a great thing for people to be able to express their sorrow.
Yeah. I'd describe it as a great moment of leadership. The moving on to the Greater Commission, I'm probably getting the names wrong.
Oh, they always change. I totally get that. Greater Sydney Commission it was.
It's
Yeah.
Greater Sydney Commission, and you were Chief Commissioner. Can you tell us what that is? And
Well, it was actually, we're a statutory authority, a statutory creation of the New South Wales government, and there was bipartisan support for both sides of government, the red team and the blue team, to create the Greater Sydney Commission. And the whole purpose was to have um, uh, multiple government agencies, especially land use planning, transport, and a lot of other government agencies, health, education, and the infrastructure committee, lots of other ones, I won't name them all, to sit around the table together to plan for Greater Sydney's regional plan. And we were working very, very closely with the Transport for New South Wales and with Infrastructure New South Wales to co-create 3 different plans which spoke to each other, you know, in total sync for infrastructure, transport, and land use planning. So the whole thing was to work together with other government agencies. Again, a bit like a scaled up version of the traffic committee, but work together for a common plan, and they could all sort of go up and down and talk to each other. And that had never happened before. So that was the intention, and that's what happened. And we delivered it in March 2018, and that was a very special moment, I have to say. And I'd been advocating for that strongly when I was deputy chair and chair of the committee for Sydney. That sort of disconnect between land use and transport planning was pretty.
Legend.
It was legendary. And if you talk to other mayors, don't make Sydney feel bad about this. If you talk to any mayors of other large cities like New York or London, they say that is the holy grail, and that is what is the hardest thing to do, to sync and to coordinate land use and transport and infrastructure planning. So it's a common problem across all cities, but we really had a good crack at solving it in the 2018 plan.
Did you solve it?
Well, I think we made it clear how everything linked together. At the time we were working on the plan in 2017, there were a lot more dwellings being built. A lot of it was actually, I think, in the apartment building boom, especially along the northwest where the metro is now, like Macquarie Park, etc., and Western Sydney, was fueled a lot by foreign investment. I think a lot of people especially from North Asia and China, were buying apartments. And say one of the areas I'd worked on design panels was the Chippendale redevelopment, Central Park. Just where the brewery used to be, and that was a very powerful one for. We thought young people would work there, and a lot of people who lived there it was bought by a lot of investors from overseas, which is totally fine. But the investor market was really pumping the housing supply market up, and the demand really. And since then, I think it's tailed off a bit. I don't think it's the committee, the Greater Sydney Committee's fault. I think there has been a general slowdown in housing creation right across Australia. But I think now we have a housing crisis, which we really have to get on top of and address if we have any crack at having any sense of intergenerational equity.
Yeah. Well, that's a great setup for my next question.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm like most other people who are spent 5 minutes in Sydney and Melbourne.
Yeah.
We have a extreme housing crisis. The Greater Commission for Western Sydney, or the Greater Commission, tried really hard, and government tried to, and the current government, Liberal and Labor, have really tried a lot of, I would say, activities at the margin, to be frank. Number one. Number two, I think that
the TOD one's different. I'd put that on a different scale,
Okay.
order of magnitude. Yeah.
But can you define what TOD is?
Well, I'm sorry, it's a planning acronym for transit-oriented development. So it's prioritizing or giving, excess oomph to doing development and density development where there are transport services available, so people don't have to get in their car and drive everywhere.
The availability of accessible land as opposed to units, and the production of that land is impossible. You've got to either go up or go out. Has just slowed down dramatically. And you can blame it on government, you can blame it on the market, you can blame it on immigrants, you can blame it on interest rates. Fundamentally, the facts show, in my view, that it's all about well-located land. And we just don't have enough of it in Sydney. And so we've got this situation. I'm talking about Sydney, but this is across
We
the
do have
country.
a lot of underutilised land.
Well, we're getting there. I agree with that. The problem is housing affordability. The median price of a house in Sydney is 1.7 million as of last month. That's the median price. We have a crisis situation where we've got to do something, dramatic to actually arrest the housing crisis, or we've got to accept that there's going to be an us and them, property and unpropertied next generation. Now, I'm not pointing a finger at anybody in particular or anything in particular, but just to say we still haven't solved the problem.
No, we haven't.
And so I've got a solution which I'm going to put on the table, and then you can tell me whether I'm on the right path or not, given your experience and your purpose. My solution is quite straightforward. Uh, if I ever become in a position where I'm able to do so, I would legislate that you can build up to 50 stories
Mm-hmm.
anywhere in the state of New South Wales within 20 kilometres of
20 kilometres.
within 20 kilometres of a train station. Within 20 kilometres. Um,
Gee, Tala.
yeah, that's a that's a that's a
That's wild.
yeah, it is wild. It's a wild, but we've got a wild problem. And this is coming from someone who's a NIMBY,
Yeah.
lives in a leafy suburb, where the maximum stories is like 2,
Okay.
and then we've got a big battle. We battle over everything, as you know, in these suburbs. But I guess for me, it's a juxtaposition whether you do something drastic now for our future generations, or because maybe my kids and your kids may be okay, because we'll pass something down. But if you don't have that, you haven't won the lottery of life, the genetic lottery of life, you ain't going to be living in Sydney. You ain't going to be buying a property. So if we don't do something crazy like that, what can we do?
Well, I think the 20 kilometres from a train station, I'm gonna say to love that is like, so that is out there, right? The Minns government and obviously Paul Scully, the planning minister, and I think the whole government, of course, have just announced a lot of TOD development sites, which are within either 400 or 800 metres of a train station. I think that's about right. That's always what the thinking has been. I think there are, but you can't just sort of do a hard line like that, like whether it's 20 stories or 50 metres or whatever the height is that's in the TOD planning control. It has to sort of stage down as well. And I think so that needs to be done. I think that's a real step forward to just say, okay, this is up for rezoning, but there has to be a discussion about rezoning and there has to be transparency, right? So people have to know what is in the mind's eye of the government when they say that. And I suspect that sometimes there's been more work than possibly has been done. But there's 2 points I'd like to make. Thoroughly endorse the principle. But somebody told me, who's an architect, had a client did a development about, 12 years ago in one of the areas very close to, in and now, a TOD area. And the value of that person's house when that TOD was declared went from 9 million to $15 million. Now that is insane because if it's already gone up by $6 million, like in effect 75%, how is the government ever going to capture the value of that uplift because it's already happening? So I think the mechanics and the government has never done, I think in Australia we are hopeless at doing value capture, seriously hopeless. So that $6 million in value has probably escaped forever. And so you've got to be really careful about how you do it. Another point I would make in terms of what's driving the shortage of housing, and everything is done for the best of intentions. But actually, in the Carr government, and everybody thought it was a good idea, they introduced what used to be called SEP 65. It's now called the Apartment Design Guidelines. And it had a really good intention of building good quality apartments. Great intention, great intention. But the effect with limiting things like minimum apartment size of 50 square meters, has been to really increase the cost of apartments. If you look at places in Europe, in really good cities, like big cities in Europe, a lot of people live in apartments which are 30 square meters, 40 and 50 square meters. Up to 50 square meters, you could actually have a lot more apartments in smaller, units and still have a very livable space, if it's got sunlight and, noise separation and stuff like that. So you would reduce the cost and you would increase the volume. So that's just one example. But I think we really need to look at how the design and quality controls are impacting affordability, because I think they really are. And I think because you need to just increase the supply of everything. But typically when they do apartments, say where I live in the Eastern Burbs, they build apartments, but they're all sort of empty nester apartments where the minimum price is like $3 to $5 million. This is not kind of like mums and dads or teachers or people, nurses or what we might call key workers. So we've got to figure out how the controls and the design guidelines interfere with the supply of housing for people starting out in life, so they can be key workers that don't have to commute for an hour and a half. And I think we just need to there's so many things to work with and so many variables, but we have to drill into what the effect of these, guideline controls are for a start.
Well, my view is based on no facts whatsoever or reality.
Mhm.
So please feel free to bring me back. But the the bottom line is, if I am a graduate, I've done a law degree, I'm just married, male or female,
Yep.
he or she has done a teacher's degree.
Mhm.
We're both on a good wicket. We're both working full time, double time actually.
Mhm.
We still cannot afford a house in
Yep.
Sydney.
It's a serious problem.
And any kind of thinking, whether it's Todd, Trevor, or Mary,
Yes.
is nowhere near enough to actually get us to a position where in 10 years' time we're going to fundamentally and tectonically change the demand supply issue. And that's why I will go again, laser beam back to 20. Okay, let's not do 50 stories, 25 stories.
Okay.
And again, I'm saying this is coming from a guy, me, I'm talking personally, where I get enraged when someone parks in front of my house on a public street. Like, why is that? And then I think, well, that's a public street. I shouldn't be that upset. So I'm one of these NIMBYs as well. But because most of Australia is, I mean,
Yep.
in our heart of hearts, we like what we've got and we like the quiet enjoyment. But for me, it's trading off our future in terms of the Australia we want compared to the rules that we have. And there needs to be a massive supply inputted into the system. Otherwise, forever, I mean, this example we just used, forever it will be a multi-million-dollar escapade that nobody can afford but a very few of us.
Yeah, I know. And the other thing, I agree. Well, maybe you can we can start talking at 25. But I think so. Say there's Parramatta Station, which
Do
is
we have a deal?
Oh,
Oh, no, we don't.
no, let's start the conversation because if you could do 25 stories as of right anywhere in 20 kilometres from Central Station, let's use a big railway station, not sort of a
Not
small one.
Amelia. Yeah, okay.
But if you can do anything 25 stories within 20 kilometres of there, that's a big change. And let me tell you an interesting story I heard. So a young guy is thinking he's works at Parramatta, and he was thinking, oh, it's really cool here. I might rent an apartment here. And I said, well, what's the price difference between, say, the inner west and Parramatta? And he said, well, funnily enough, it's not that much. Like he's looking at a studio. It's a difference between, say, $700 and $600 or thereabouts. But the problem he's got is that the build quality in a lot of buildings in the Parramatta area is not right. A lot of them have got defects. So there's that, if you like, defect risk, which is more intense and something I wasn't aware of, more intense in some places than others. So you've got to do 25, if you're going to do 25 stories in a lot more places, and let's not settle finally on exactly where, but if you're going to do a lot of height and density, you've got to make sure they're well built and they're not going to have structural cracks and all that sort of stuff. So I think we've got to sort out the integrity of the construction system too, because the one thing you can't have, and it's fed into a bigger difference between the price of apartments and houses, is the risk of structural integrity, because it really turns people off buying or living in apartments if they've got a whole lot of rectification works. It's just the whole system's got to work. It's got the design requirements have got to work for affordability. The building integrity's got to work. Where you put the density's got to work. And you've got to have transport and infrastructure aligned with the density. So we've spoken about a place along the Parramatta River which has got huge heights but very little transport infrastructure. And that's what you don't want. So you've got to align the infrastructure with the density.
I guess all of it is trade-off in some sense. And now that we've got to 25, stories, we're making progress. It's like the Middle East situation,
Yeah.
slow progress. But the bottom line is we need different out-of-the-box thinking. Actually, we're ignoring the box because the Liberal government and the current Labor government, the Mins government, is trying really hard. But let me give you an example. The Rose Hill Racecourse, so we put 4,000 or 5,000 units up. That's great. But we need a lot more, even if they got that through, which they did.
Was it going to be 5,000?
Yeah, 5,000.
Yeah.
We need.
Well, they said there's going to be 10,000 in near Wallara Station
True.
in Wallara on the
Yeah.
Edgecliff line.
So for me, this is still talking on the side of the issue
Yeah.
because 5 plus 5 does not equal 500,000.
Mm.
We're like 500,000 apartments and properties behind what we need to keep up, which means the demand and supply price are going to keep going up. The $1.7 million median will very quickly become 2.5, and we've already priced people out of the market. So this is why I'm going for the radical solution.
Yeah, I totally respect that, but I think that the TOD policy of the government is, like if you go too far out on the edge, then you're less likely to deliver it. I think there's a real opportunity to actually deliver, not everywhere, but for a lot more housing to be delivered in the TOD declared areas, because it's pretty clear what's intended. And the other thing I would sort of encourage strongly is that underutilized land is properly utilised. Now, there is a lot of public housing, and in places like Paris, they have been massively increasing the supply of what we call social housing or public housing, which is amazing. Like and they've been doing it in what they call the banlieue or the suburbs of Paris, not right in the middle of where the Eiffel Tower is. They've been doing it in the suburbs where now all the life is. It's a bit like Parramatta. All the life and the energy of Paris is now in the banlieue, which used to be like the place that no self-respecting Parisian would want to go. And they've built a lot of social housing there. We've got to get much smarter at that. I can think of a lot of places in the inner city and in the Parramatta area, and I'll nominate a few. Redfern Waterloo, right? So I was on the board of the Redfern Waterloo Authority from its inception to its conclusion, and we did a couple of concept plans for redeveloping all that public housing. There was early engagement. There was a very good team, sort of doing all the planning, engaging with the community, et cetera, et cetera. There's a huge amount also, which we were not asked to talk about, in Surrey Hills, from Elizabeth Street up around there. If you just look at Google Maps, there is so much public housing. You need more public housing, but you need more density and more housing diversity around there. So you need all sorts of housing and much taller. That's where you could do the 25 stories. And I reckon you'd get a lot of housing. The government should keep an ownership interest over at least some of the land, so it gets to determine what happens in future. And it's really kind of like perverse, because all of that part of the inner city has, if you like, built up and densified around this area, and it's kind of like the black hole in the middle of a whole lot of other really interesting stuff. So the government's got to actually get its skates on and deliver the land it already owns in a sustainable and I guess, in a very socially responsible way. Social housing, but also affordable housing plus private housing. We've got to do it better. And there's other places in Parramatta like Tilapia.
Yeah. How can I disagree with it? I don't disagree with any of that. But the only thing, and this is me pushing the same line, I guess, is that until property prices stop increasing by 10% a year on average across New South Wales, in particular in Sydney, in the metropolitan areas, we haven't succeeded. And none of that to me adds up to that. And this is
Well, you can't. Yeah, I mean, it'd be a good start to deliver. Like, I reckon you could easily do, if you can do, is it 5,000 homes at Rose Hill? You've got to be able to do 20 to 30 in that whole inner city area and Tilapia. Like, there is so much there, and the good thing is there are already services there. Like, there's the new Waterloo train, there's Redfern Station, there's the city, there's the new light rail at Tilapia. There's all the services already there. There's no reason it can't happen.
well, this is I think it's a challenge of our life,
Mm.
our lifetime, in terms of housing affordability and the cost of living, and they're very closely connected.
Mm.
But I guess, as I said, I'm just looking for crazy ideas, any idea that will help
Yeah.
us think about working outside the system, because I can see a time of very much Victorian era, the propertied and the unpropertied,
Mm.
and that's increasing, and nobody disagrees about what to do about it.
Yeah. Well, lots of people have lots of great suggestions, and they probably all together would make a big impact. We've just got to figure out which ones have the best impact. But I think we've got to be honest and say, well, what things did we do 20 years ago which have actually had a negative impact, and should we revisit that?
Yeah.
Because I don't think it was clear to me at the time that the design guidelines were adopted by the state government that it was going to have such a material effect on affordability.
And unfortunately has.
Yeah.
And I think we can agree that prices will continue to go up for the next 20 to 30 years.
Well, I'm not a forecaster, but if the past is any guide, they will continue to rise. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Can I switch conversation? That's fascinating, and I'm still going to try into wild and insane ideas.
Oh no, why not?
And go back to Lucy Turnbull,
Yeah.
AO.
Yeah.
And so, again, start with the question about, well, you come from the Hughes family. Your great-grandfather was Mayor of Sydney. Your father was not only the Attorney General, but legal icon and legend. Even I knew who Tom Hughes was,
Yeah.
a QC growing up. And a husband was the Prime Minister of Australia. How do you deal with that, and how do you feel about that?
Well, I have a very strong feeling that I've always been, like my dad was an amazing, like his work ethic was, I've never seen anything like it except for Malcolm. They both had had in Dad's case, have in Malcolm's case, this incredible work ethic and commitment and, huge brains. So that's helped. But what inspired me about both of them, because I never met my grandfather or my great grandfather, what inspired me about both of them was that they were just, and I think everybody's like this. They were just normal, hardworking people. To me, they weren't like, like they were just who they were. I've never kind of, I must be the Australian culture heavily embedded in me. I've never looked up or down. I always try to look straight in the eyes of anyone I meet. I've never been kind of, I've never woken up and thought, oh, my dad's, a great barrister and my husband's a politician or a banker or whatever he was. To me, they're just human beings. And I think every human is actually like that. No matter who your parents are, they're just human beings, with what they do. And you can't let that kind of curtail you, and you can't let it kind of entitle you. So it is what it is. And I'm very lucky to have my parents, my grandparents, and also Malcolm. But you can't let it curtail or give you a sense of entitlement. And that's the Australian in me. Like it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter who your parents are, what sort of background you have. You are at the end of the day no better or worse than any human being you engage with, no matter how what they've achieved. And one of the best compliments ever paid me was somebody who worked with me in the city. She was an officer, like an employee of the council. And she said, Lucy, you're just amazing. You speak to, Princess Anne exactly the same way you speak to the concierge in the building. I said, well, I think they're all about the same, like there's no difference between humans. We're all humans.
Well, that's very, very Australian. And we like to think that's what we do, but you're pretty amazing personally in terms of actually doing it. I mean, you're definitely born into an establishment family that achieved amazing things, and you have racked up, amazing achievements. If I had to read, which I will at the end of this, the kind of things you have participated in, leaving aside your great-grandfather, your father, and your husband, independently, and that's tougher than it looks. I mean, in my family alone, I've got, my brothers and sisters and our children now trying to live up to that, and
Yeah.
that's a tough gig.
It can be. It really can be, but it can be, definitely. Growing up in the shadows of, great parents or grandparents or something, it can be a tough gig, but you can't let it ruin your life. You got to kind of work with the material you have.
Well, you certainly have gone the opposite. It's not only ruined your life, you've independently built a huge career in business, in politics. I'm going backwards here. Politics,
Yeah.
cities and urban life and urban culture, and the arts and philanthropy, where our most recent interaction as I'm a director of Taronga Zoo and you're chair of the foundation. So it's been an amazing thing. I want to compliment you on that more
Oh,
and
thank you.
recognize it, because it's more difficult than you're being quite humble than it seems over the years, to be all those things. Certainly not entitled and certainly a giver.
Oh, thank you, Tilla. Well, I try to be because coming back to where we started, very lucky, very fortunate in life, resolved never to feel sorry for myself and just get on with living.
Indeed, you do that. Now, I've got a final raft of
Yep.
questions that I ask at the end of an interview. The quickfire questions,
Yeah.
just to get to know you a bit more. There's about 57 of them. No, there's only 3.
Go.
And I ask them to every person who appears on a podcast. So the first one is, what's the biggest myth or misconception we have about Lucy Turnbull?
Well, because I think what we were just talking about, the people look at, who I'm married to, who my dad is, who my grandfather was, yada, 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 great-grandfather, et cetera, that they think I'm different to anyone else. I don't think I actually am, and I certainly don't think I am. So I think people prejudge people according to, if you like, what I call relevant, but in many cases extraneous facts. So you have to deal with humans as you take them as they are and not be kind of conditioned or take seriously the luck you have in life or the luck you don't have in life. Just do your best, whatever the situation is.
What's your guilty pleasure?
Well, you know what? Sometimes I get very tired, physically tired, mentally tired, especially if I have a very busy week or, times. And sometimes I just take myself to bed for the day, just lie down all day. I don't have small kids anymore. This is very possible to do. Usually when Malcolm goes for a very long kayak or something, I'm literally lying down in bed reading, kind of like, or not reading, or binging, crazy television shows. So it's just like going full hermit. I do the full hermit, and that's a bit of a guilty pleasure.
Well, indeed, that's pretty. What's the one thing you can't live without? Family excluded.
Yeah, family, but also a sense of purpose and a sense of, getting up in the morning and doing something that I feel like I want to do and feel that it will, be a positive thing to do.
Well, purpose is very much part of Lucy Turnbull. And the last question, if you can go back to a younger version of yourself, what advice would you give?
Well, funnily enough, I was terrified. I never did debating in high school. I think everybody should always do debating or public speaking when they're in primary school and high school, because it really took me until I was like well over 30 to feel confident about speaking in public. And Malcolm kept on saying, don't be crazy, just do it. Well, he was a debating champion and everything, and went, oh, it's a bit scary. But he said, it's just a matter of practice. Just do it. Just keep doing it. And he was absolutely right. But I would tell myself, if I was speaking to my younger self, I would say, don't be ridiculous. Just dive into public speaking. Don't be shy. Life is not a dress rehearsal. Just go and do it.
Well, thank you very much, Lucy.
Thank you, Talal.
It's been fantastic. Thank you for appearing on Uncommon Ground. That's certainly uncommon.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you've got something out of this conversation, I encourage you to share it, rate it, or leave a review, as it really helps others find the show. And if you're not already subscribed, hit the button on your podcast app or on YouTube at Talal Yassin. We drop episodes every fortnight, each one a deep dive with someone who isn't afraid to speak their mind or stand their ground. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and don't be afraid to challenge the status quo.